Welcome back to Rekindling the Legacy podcast. My name is Dr. Juhi Gupta.
And I am Professor Andrew Davis, and we are coming to you courtesy of the Inclusive Futures Foundation. We're an NGO that works for education, healthcare, the environment, culture, and on women and children's rights. And you can find out more about us on our website, theinclusivefuturesfoundation.com.
Today, we are exploring the life of a remarkable woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon against oppression is not sword or gun, but a pen. We are talking about Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, born in 1904, who became one of the most influential voices in Hindi literature and the Indian freedom struggle. Her famous poem, Jhansi Ki Rani, didn't just tell a story, it ignited a generation.
And one of the many things that's so fascinating about Subhadra is how early her literary genius emerged. Her first poem was published when she was just 9 years old. Can you imagine that? At an age when many children are still learning to read properly, she was already creating literature that would go on to be published.
And this happened despite being born into a conservative family in Nihalpur village in Allahabad district, where the ghungat, which means covering the head, was mandatory for women. Yet, her father, Thakur Ramnath Singh, was passionate about education and made sure all his children, including his daughters, received proper schooling.
And that proved to be critically important for her. Even in conservative settings, there were progressive parents who understood the power of education. Subhadra attended Cruthwaite Girls' School in Allahabad, where she met Mahadevi Varma, who would go on to become a very close friend, but also a fellow literary luminary.
And the friendship with Mahadevi Varma is particularly significant because both women were passionate about Hindi literature. They were part of a generation of women writers who were using their voices to shape cultural and political discourse.
Now, Subhadra married Thakur Lakshman Singh Chauhan in 1919 when she was just 15 years old. What's remarkable is that despite coming from a conservative family himself, her husband dedicated his life to improving the social status of women and the backward classes.
That partnership was crucial to her development as both a writer and an activist. They had 5 children together, Sudha, Ajay, Vijay, Mamta, and Ashok. But motherhood didn't diminish her commitment to social justice. In fact, it seemed to strengthen it.
And she actively demonstrated her progressive mindset within her own family. There were instances where she actively opposed her mother's discriminatory treatment of lower caste neighbours. She was fighting untouchability at the most personal level.
And this brings us to her political awakening. When she moved to Jabalpur after marriage, her patriotic feelings intensified, influenced by her husband's own commitment to social justice. Together, they joined Gandhi's non-cooperation movement.
But it was the flag Satyagrahi in Jabalpur in 1923 that really marked her entry into active resistance. This was the movement of hoisting the national flag to challenge British legitimacy, a simple but really powerful act of defiance.
And Subhadra wasn't just a participant, she was a frontline leader. For this, she was arrested by British police and sent to Nagpur jail in 1923. Here's what makes this particularly remarkable. She was pregnant with her first child, Sudha, during her imprisonment.
And in today's world, that seems extraordinary. Imagine being a young mother pregnant in a British jail for the crime of asserting your nation's right to exist. She was later released and was able to give birth in Jabalpur, but that experience must have profoundly shaped her understanding of British oppression.
In 1930, she was presiding over the women's section of a state Congress committee of Madhya Pradesh, and in 1936, she was elected to the Bihar Legislative Assembly. So we see her moving from literary activism to direct political participation.
But throughout her political journey, she never abandoned her first and primary weapon, her pen. She wrote round about 88 poems and 46 short stories, many of them focused on patriotic themes and on social justice.
Her collection Mukul contained her most famous work, Jhansi Ki Rani, which described the bravery of Rani Lakshmibai. This poem became instrumental in inspiring common people, especially youth, to think about resistance and courage.
And the way that she uses historical heroines like Rani Lakshmibai to inspire contemporary resistance is particularly powerful, isn't it, Jihi? She was connecting past courage with present necessity.
And she wasn't just writing for adults. She wrote poems for children, understanding that inspiring the next generation was crucial for long-term change.
The 1942 Quit India movement brought fresh challenges to her. Her husband Laxman was arrested early in the movement, leaving Subhadra to continue the struggle while caring for their children, including a young child with a palate defect who needed surgery.
She took her impaired child to Bombay for surgery while continuing her political activities and dealing with the emotional pain of her husband's imprisonment. That's remarkable resilience.
And then she too was arrested for continuing her work in the freedom movement, along with two of her children. She entrusted the care of the family to Sudha, her eldest child. Imagine the responsibility being placed on that young girl's shoulders.
But even in prison, Subhadra's character shone through. She fought for the rights and well-beings of fellow prisoners, often giving her own food to those undergoing severe sentences. Leadership isn't just about grand gestures. It's about these daily acts of compassion, Andrew.
Yes, indeed. And sadly, her health deteriorated while she was in jail, Jihi. She was eventually released due to her medical condition. But she did recover, and after recovering, she was elected to the Bihar Legislative Assembly in 1946, showing that her political appeal remained strong.
During the traumatic partition period in 1947, she and her husband worked actively to maintain communal harmony. This speaks to her understanding that freedom meant more than just getting rid of British. It meant building an inclusive society.
Tragically, Subhadra's remarkable life was cut short in February 1948. She died in an accident while returning from a conference, travelling from Nagpur to Jabalpur. She was just 44 years old.
The loss was felt deeply across India. Her death was commemorated as a loss of one of the great heroes of the nation. But her legacy lived on through her writings and through her children, particularly Sudha, who wrote a biography of her mother called Mila Tej Se Tej.
India's recognition of Subhadra's contributions has been substantial. An Indian Coast Guard ship was named after her. A statue was placed before the Municipal Corporation Office in Jabalpur, and the Indian Post released a commemorative stamp in her honour back in 1976.
More recently, Google commemorated her with a doodle on her 177th birth anniversary in 2021, noting how her poems remain popular in Indian classrooms and continue to encourage young generations to stand up against social injustice.
Jihi, we always try to talk about the legacy and the lasting impact of the women that we talk about. And what strikes me most about Subhadra Kumari Chauhan is how she understood that revolution happens on multiple levels. In the streets through Satyagrahi, in the legislature through political participation, and in the heart and mind through poetry and literature.
She recognized that lasting change requires cultural transformation, not just political change. Her poem, Jhansi Ki Rani, didn't just tell the story of a historical queen, it created a template for contemporary courage.
And she lived that courage herself as a young mother in British jails, as a leader in dangerous movements, as a voice for the marginalised, and as somebody who challenged discriminatory practices even within her own family.
Her approach to activism was holistic. She fought for independence, but she also fought against untouchability. She wrote patriotic poetry, but she also wrote for children. She led political movement, but she also cared for fellow prisoners.
So in some ways, she embodied the kind of citizen that independent India needed, someone who understood that freedom meant responsibility, that rights came with duties, and that literature could be as powerful as legislation.
Subhadra Kumari Chauhan showed up that you don't have to choose between being a mother and being a revolutionary, between being a poet and being a politician, between personal kindness and public courage.
She published her first poem at 9, was imprisoned while pregnant at 19, led movements in her 20s and 30s, and died serving her country at 44. That's a life lived with incredible intensity and purpose.
And her words continue to inspire. Somewhere in India today, a child is probably reciting Jhansi Ki Rani in school, learning about courage not from a textbook, but from verses that make heroism feel real and achievable.
So that is Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, poet, mother, revolutionary, legislator, and proof that the pen truly can be mightier than the sword when wielded with courage and conviction.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Rekindling the Legacy. Until next time, remember that every generation has the power to write its own verses of freedom and justice.
And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next episode, then why not subscribe to our podcast? We look forward to seeing you next time.